If you're struggling to catch bass in a swim bait this winter, this is the video for you. We're going to be sharing the top 3 most common mistakes that new swim bait fishermen make in the wintertime that prevent them from putting bass in the boat. Let's get into it. Really quick, I'm going to announce the winner of this week's Bridgeford Beef Jerky giveaway. Every week, Bridgeford gives away a full case, that's 12 packs of Bridgeford Beef Jerky, to a commenter on our Monday videos. If you don't want to miss upcoming Bridgeford Beef Jerky giveaways, make sure to subscribe to the Bass Fishing Declassified YouTube channel to see our Monday videos and enter in for a chance to win. This week's winner is on the screen here. If you're the winner, email us at info@fishthemoment.com with your username and also your mailing address, and we'll have Bridgeford send you a free case of beef jerky straight to your house. Huge shout out to Bridgeford for being the main sponsor of the Bass Fishing Declassified YouTube channel and for doing a giveaway every single week to let you guys try their great product. It's a great snack for the lake, and you can pick up Bridgeford Beef Jerky at your local Walmarts, gas stations, or dollar stores. Now back to the video.
A swim bait is a phenomenal bait to choose for any angler at all levels. I use them in my professional level tournaments, and at the same time, anytime I conduct a guide trip with a bunch of beginning anglers, one of the first baits I grab for them is a small swim bait. You know, it truly is a simple technique to use. You can cast it out and wind it back. Now, that's a great thing for a beginning angler, but you can double or triple the amount of bites you have by altering up your retrieve. So when I give the bait to a new angler and say, just cast it out and wind it back, that's because they don't have the skill level or the experience to understand, even at that point, how to impart additional action into the bait. They're generating enough bites on a simple straight retrieve back that they're satisfied. But for those anglers out there that are looking to improve their swim bait success, it's crucial to impart a little additional action. Now, what I mean by that is it's not simply just cast it out, straight retrieve it, and it's not simply cast it out, retrieve it for a little bit at one speed, then burn it for another speed, then slow it down. Now, that works too, but a lot of times it's simply just giving your swim bait a tiny little twitch. And what I mean by that is when you're straight retrieving it, give your rod tip a quick pop. What that does is it flares the bait and it takes it out of that straight retrieve. It gives the bait a look like maybe it's going to try to escape. And if you've got a fish that's following your swim bait, which happens all of the time with swim baits, they like to get right on the tail and follow it. As soon as that swim bait gets a little hop or a little twitch, that triggers the reaction strike out of the bass that's following it. So you can drastically improve your number of bites that you're going to get on the water by simply just adding little twitches. And you don't have to just do it by popping your rod tip. You can also do it by just giving a quick half-quarter reel turn where you're just reeling along and all of a sudden you just give it a quick little pop. That does the same thing as twitching the rod tip. Now, absolutely, I would say vary your retrieve as well. Go a little faster, slow it down, go a little faster, slow it down. But always in the middle of that retrieve, add in a handful of little twitches because those twitches are going to be when the fish get the reaction strike. That's when that triggers them to eat it. And it's something that a lot of anglers aren't doing. And I can assure you, you will get more bites by adding in that little twitch.
Hey guys, Kyle Cordiana here with Bass Fishing Declassified. Listen, some of the most common mistakes I see throwing swim baits is the fear of getting hung up. So with an individual swim bait like this Yum Pulse here, this is a 3/8 ounce head. I find it that I catch so many more fish if I'm willing to let that bait sink all the way to the bottom, especially when I'm fishing rocks. A lot of times with an individual swim bait like this, I'm throwing it at rocks. So I'm throwing it all the way out there. I'm letting it sink all the way to the bottom, even if it's 20, 30 foot deep. And I'm crawling this thing with a slow reel over these rocks. I'm counting rocks just like you do with a jig. And you will get hung up with this, but it's really easy to get off. You'd be surprised by just doing the whole boomerang trick, how the inertia of that 3/8 ounce head will shoot that hook off and you'll be back to reeling. A lot of times, of course, you get that bite as soon as you get off that rock. So don't be afraid to throw this individual Yum Pulse swim bait out there, let it sink all the way to the bottom and slow roll it. I'm almost trying to get hung up. The more I get hung up and the more I'm popping it over rocks, and I start to get really in tune with what is on the bottom out there. Even with the forward-facing sonar stuff, these fish bury up in the bottom and you cannot see them. So there's a lot of times there's 10, 15, 20 fish down there that you have no clue there. They're hiding in the rocks, they're laying down there on their bellies, and they're not shown in the forward-facing sonar. So don't be afraid to let it sink all the way to the bottom. Same thing applies if you're going to throw a Flash Mob Junior. This new Yum kit right here that comes with these awesome Yum Scottsboro baits. Throw this out there, let it sink all the way to the bottom. Slow reel it. Don't be afraid to get hung up. You might lose a few more baits, but you're going to catch a ton of more fish. If you're going to go to brush, get away from the open hook. If you want to fish brush piles, use a belly-weighted swim bait hook. That's going to keep you from getting hung up too, but don't be afraid to get hung up. That's where the fish live.
The most common mistake, or I guess misconception, that I see a lot of anglers make about swim bait fishing in the wintertime is thinking that a swim bait can only be fished for suspended bass. This is definitely not the case though, and I catch some of my biggest bass of the winter fishing small swim baits near the bottom around rock piles. There are a couple reasons why a small swim bait fished deep and close to the bottom is very effective. The first is that schools of bait fish are not always going to be suspended and roaming out in the middle of the water column, despite what you might hear from a lot of other guys on YouTube. You're going to see a lot of videos, including myself, fishing for suspended bass that are just randomly chasing bait fish over creek channels in the middle of ditches and drains and all that stuff using the live scope. And while that does happen and it allows you to catch a lot of good fish, there is a much simpler way to catch bass that doesn't require live scope at all and is something that's very overlooked by a lot of anglers. Basically, what I'm talking about is fishing for bass that are actually tight to the bottom and that feed on bait fish schools that go and feed around the rock piles offshore. The one thing about bait fish is that there's no food source for them out there suspended in the middle of the lake where there's nothing around. They have to at some point move up to some rocks or trees or brush piles to actually feed on plankton to survive. If you have good rock piles on your lake, whether that's in 10 foot of water or as deep as 50 feet of water, and you have bait fish in the area, there's a very good likelihood that eventually those bait fish are going to have to move in and feed on the plankton around those rocks at some point, again, just to refuel and have enough energy to then swim out in the middle again. As a result, there's going to be some population of bass that are going to be living around these rock piles year-round, or basically throughout the entire winter. They might move up in the spring, but a lot of times they'll move back out in the fall, and they'll be there from the fall all the way through till they spawn again later that next year. As a result, you can target these bass with a small swim bait to imitate the bait fish that are moving in to feed on those rock piles and trigger some of those bass that are just hunkered down in those rocks waiting to ambush shad as they come by. The swim bait I go to is a very specific bait, and it works really well when the shad are small on your lake, let's say 2 inches to 3 inches long. This is the Megabass Hasdong 3-inch swim bait. It has a nice thin profile which imitates a little more subtle bait fish, and it doesn't give off a ton of kick, which is good for those lethargic winter bass. I'll pair that with a very special jig head that I didn't really want to talk about because it's really good, and I kind of had it to myself, but they finally put it on Tackle Warehouse, so I'm going to talk about it, and that is the Great Lakes Finesse Sneaky Spin. It's a 5/16 ounce underspin with a 1/0 hook. It's one of the few small underspins they have on the market that is heavy enough, this 5/16 ounce, to fish deep, also has a small enough hook, that 1/0 hook, to fit that small swim bait, and also has a nice little underspin on it. I have a feeling that there's something about that blade ticking against the bottom and hitting those rocks that really trigger fish to bite, and I actually catch more fish when I have an underspin on fishing that bait near the bottom than when I just fish a standard jig head. Seems kind of weird and counterintuitive because that blade is just kind of ticking those rocks, but I do think it's that sound, and I think it can kind of imitate a bait fish that's hitting up against the rocks, but also it might imitate some crawfish that are moving around down there as well, because you will sometimes catch fish that have crawfish down their throats with this swim bait. So it catches fish that are feeding on crawfish and bait fish at the same time. The way I'll fish this bait is casting that thing out, letting it sink all the way down to the bottom, and then just slowly reeling that bait as slow as I possibly can and ticking those rocks with the swim bait. You want to feel that bait making contact with those rocks, and a lot of guys in my area of the country call it scrubbing a swim bait. Basically just ticking those rocks with the swim bait, keeping it just above the top of those rocks. And if those bass are down there waiting to ambush the bait fish, they're going to come in and absolutely crush the bait. The setup I'm going to use with this bait is going to be a Denali Covert Light 7'2" medium heavy power fast action spinning rod with a Abu Garcia Max Pro reel I picked up at Walmart. I think it's like $30 or $40, something like that. Pairing that with some Sunline braided line, 12-pound test, and then I'm going to be using a fluorocarbon leader tied with an FG knot to this braid of 6-pound test fluorocarbon. I like to use a very light line, 6-pound test fluorocarbon FC Sniper with this little swim bait because it'll keep it down in the water column. The heavier the line you go with, the more that bait has a tendency to rise up, and a 5/16 ounce head is not really that heavy if you're fishing in 20 or 30 feet of water. That's why you have to use a super slow retrieve to keep it down those rocks, and this exact setup to make sure that that bait doesn't rise too much in the water column. If you combine all that together and find those offshore rock piles with your side imaging or your down imaging, it's a great alternative for chasing suspended bass out in the middle of the lake and trying to catch them on the swim bait that way. Instead, fish it close to the bottom, look for those bass that are ambushing those bait fish when they come in to feed, and you're gonna put a lot of fish in the boat. And that's it for this video, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, leave a comment down below letting us know what your favorite tip from this video was. Also, make sure to subscribe to the Bass Fishing Declassified YouTube channel so you don't miss any future uploads. Thanks for checking out this video. We'll see you on the next one.